Alrighty, guys, let's talk about the new Star Wars show, Skeleton Crew. This is going to be a full spoiler discussion, so if you have not seen the first 2 episodes of Skeleton Crew, no worries, I'll just make sure to save this segment, this podcast, this video for later and come back once you have, because we will be talking full spoilers about the first 2 episodes of Skeleton Crew. This is your final warning. Here we go. So I always like to start out these segments, especially when we're getting into a new show. It's really exciting because we have Skeleton Crew and Creature Commandos that are starting out this week, and so it's really exciting to dive into new shows. But Skeleton Crew, I like to always give some context with just, how I'm approaching these shows and what my mindset was going into it. And so, like I mentioned in my immediate reaction, the Star Wars shows have been pretty hit or miss. And I am personally somebody who has not experienced quite the lows that a lot of people have. I don't hate any of the shows particularly. I think, for example, Obi-Wan was very disappointing. I think Ahsoka kind of veered off and got boring and disappointing. I think the Book of Boba Fett was incredibly boring, but, I don't hate any of the shows. I think Acolyte was disappointing. I don't think it was a terrible, terrible show. I just think it was disappointing. On the other hand, I've also always been the kind of person who hasn't experienced quite the highs of, these Disney Plus Star Wars shows. So, I'm not somebody who thinks Andor is terrible. I like Andor, actually, quite a bit. But I do need to rewatch it, admittedly. I'm going to try to rewatch it before Season 2 comes out, and we'll talk about it then. But I was not this kind of person who was like, Andor is my new favorite Star Wars anything. I love Rogue One, really liked Andor, but, Andor was not the kind of thing where it was like, this is peak Star Wars for me, which again, I admit, I need to rewatch it. It's been a while, so there is that. Even Mandalorian, though, seasons 1 and 2, I was like, this is good. It's good. It's solid, but it has problems with the show structure and, the pacing and the content some of the time that I was like, not really for me. And so I personally, just with these Disney Plus Star Wars shows, I've just been always sort of, it's the range of my likes and dislikes has been kind of small. I've never really loved a show before. But Skeleton Crew, episodes 1 and 2, I loved episodes 1 and 2 of Skeleton Crew. Not without its minor nitpicks and its minor faults, because, everything... it can't be perfect, right? And so there are some things in there that I wasn't a huge fan of, but I think overall I couldn't believe how much I loved episodes 1 and 2. Now, the caveat to that always, like I mentioned in my media reaction, is that, well, I also really loved, maybe loved is the wrong word, it's too strong a word, but I really liked the first episode of Obi-Wan. I might have even said I loved it at the time. I thought it was great, the first episode of Obi-Wan. And so I just, I'm somebody who's like, yeah, like it's better to be in this position than not, because if you hated the first 2 episodes, well, I mean, sure, you could end up loving the show, but it's a harder hill to climb at that point. It's much easier to, say you love the first 2 episodes and be hopeful, right? So, it's sort of tempering your expectations of saying, just because the first 2 episodes are really good and I love them, and I'll talk about why. Doesn't mean that the show is going to be great, but I have hope. Right? This episode, like these 2 episodes did for me what I don't think a lot of the Star Wars shows have done, is, made me fall in love with the story and the characters that they're building. I think even for Obi-Wan, I was like, well, we know Obi-Wan. It's Obi-Wan. And, I'm just interested and intrigued to see where the story is going. The story didn't go where I wanted it to go, or that's not even necessarily the problem. It just didn't go in a way that was satisfying. But, I was disappointed in that regard. But this is a show that I think I've very quickly fallen in love with the characters and with the direction and the tone that they're going in. So we'll talk about all that. So we're going to do our usual play-by-play. I did, take notes for episodes 1 and 2, and so we'll go episode 1 first, and then we'll talk about episode 2. So starting out with episode 1, immediately, the music. I love the music. It's over the opening credits, but it's so whimsical, and it has that, it's just classic Star Wars. It feels very whimsy and adventure, and I love that about the opening. And right away, we have this opening. It's not a crawl, but the opening text where it's establishing this is right after the New Republic. So okay, they really love their episode 6, post episode 6 storylines. I wonder if they still have plans to incorporate the Skeleton Crew into the rest of their Mandalorian universe. Honestly, after seeing these first 2 episodes, as much as I love these characters, I almost wish they wouldn't. It would feel really weird to see Mandalorian and Luke Skywalker with these kids. Maybe with Jude Law, whoever is Jedi Silvo, Captain Silvo, if that's even his real name. But, I don't know. I just kind of prefer them on their own adventure at this point. But yeah, they're establishing this is right after the establishment of the New Republic. And so we start out with a little bit of a space battle, and it's actual space piracy. And, we've seen, obviously, the first shot of Star Wars, or one of the first sequences of Star Wars ever, was a ship, the Tantive 4, getting boarded. But, this ship boarding, it's like piracy. It's actual piracy. And it feels much more I don't know, it feels tactical, and we're going for it, right? It's a very different tone, I think, than other Star Wars projects. And so I think that that's really interesting. Honestly, the kind of vibes that I got, and it was especially when the bridges, right? The bridges between the ships gets destroyed, and then all the pirates start sailing in with their grappling guns, grappling hooks. I don't even know, but they come in and board the ship. And there's a way in which that looks very fake and very cartoony and very silly, right? I mean, honestly, I'm thinking back to Ahsoka, right? And there's that scene where Ahsoka is just standing on top of the ship. That looked weird. That didn't look right. This, though, there's something about this that, and for those of you who have seen Clone Wars, you'll probably understand what I'm trying to say. It felt very Clone Wars. It felt very live action Clone Wars, and in all the best ways. I love that. It's the music too. It's the way that it's paced. I just thought it was fantastic. So we're introduced to Captain Silvo. Very clearly Jude Law. I mean, it's Jude Law's accent, so, very clearly Jude Law. He's wearing the helmet, of course. And then, it's a classic scheme of, there's an empty vault, and so we get this sort of bait and switch, which you see coming, but I don't think that's the point, to trick you or anything. And we get the opening prologue of it looks like Jude Law is being undermined by his pirates, which will get picked up at the very end of episode 2. And then we get introduced to our kid. So the first kid up is Wim, and I mean, I think what they did really well is establishing the backstory so quickly, because his family life is really sad. We get, a revelation later that I think his mom has passed away, but his dad, it's not like his dad is a negligent father or anything negligent may be actually the right word. It's not like his dad is a malicious father, though. It's not like, he's trying, he hates his son or anything. I think he really does care about his son, but in a way that just doesn't really convey itself, I think, in the way that Wim needs him. And I think that that's just really sad. And this poor kid, obviously later we see the scene where he's walking past Neil's house, and he sees Neil, and Neil's family is so happy, and that's just such a sad scene. But it's establishing the kids and their backstory very quickly. The other thing that's really interesting, speaking of establishing, is that we get established here Star Wars, but in the suburbs. And they're going to school. It really is that 80s kind of vibe. And I don't know, honestly, I don't know how to feel, because it's very close to real life. It looks very close to real life, save for a few things, changed here and there. But those are the suburbs, and that's a school. It's just a droid is teaching, and they have tablets. But they have tablets. He's basically holding an iPad the whole time. And the suburbs look like the suburbs. They're driving around, they're speeders, but they're basically cars and bikes. And I don't know how I feel. Honestly, I think it works well enough. But it's towing the line. It's definitely towing the line between, breaking my, suspension of disbelief, if you will. But anyways, we're introduced now to the second kid, who is Neil. Neil is so cute. You have to have an earnest kid in the group. Kid who's just always, he's not really ready for the adventure, but he gets thrust into it. Kind of the Sam of the group, in terms of Lord of the Rings. Or I guess Sam is a little more, protective, and Neil's just kind of scared. But Neil's so cute, and I love that. I just love the dynamic between him and Wim as well. It's so funny too how that they start out the episode with them pretending to fight with fake lightsabers, because let's be honest, like, I grew up watching the prequels, which, say what you will. I grew up watching the prequels and then the original trilogy, and my friends and I, we would also just have fake lightsaber fights and run around and pretend we were Jedi. I mean, it's so nostalgic in a way. And it's not nostalgic even for, it's not like nostalgic in the way that, Toby and Andrew show up, right, in No Way Home. It's nostalgic in a different way, where it's almost like these are the kids that was us. That was really us who was living out that dream and that fantasy of pretending to be in Star Wars, which I think is really, really adorable. But it's so cute. And I think the other thing that I was noticing too, because I was afraid of this, right? I talked about this in my hopes and expectations predictions video, is that I was really scared that this was going to veer into cringy very quickly, like being a very kiddie kind of show. But there is nothing cringy about it. It's so earnest, and yet it felt so accessible and so relatable, and it kind of makes your heart smile, and I think it's such a well done job by John Watts, who is the director of this episode. And for those of you who don't know, he is the director of the 3 MCU Spider-Man films. And I think that one of the things that I also noticed was that this episode, the one that he directed, was directed so assertively, and it has just that kind of quiet confidence that he directs all the Spider-Man films with, which I also just really, really love. So then, anyways, we get the scene here where they're going to the school. I thought it was so funny. It's, not the adult telling all the students that the career fair will decide their future. That hit too close to home. Also interesting that they're talking about this thing called the Great Work. Sounds very, indoctrinating like, very propaganda like, a little close to propaganda. I wonder if they're going to explore this concept of the Great Work. I don't even know. what that even means. But it's also really cute because we get more dynamics here, just little kids at school. Neil has a crush on the girl, and Wim wants to be a Jedi. It's so cute. And then, like I said, Wim walks by later on. He walks by Neil's house and sees his family and sees how happy they are, and it's just really sad. It's sad, but it's not in a depressing way. It's just sort of establishing the characters and where they're coming from. So then we get introduced to the next two characters, the final two characters. That's Fern, and we learn later the other girl is KB. And they're biking and they're trying to fix their bike, power converter, all that classic stuff. So we get back to, and we'll get back to those two characters, I'm sure, when they meet up with Wim and with Neil. These names, by the way, every time you start a new show, you have to learn all these names, and I'm getting there. Like it takes me a couple episodes to fully just nail it down, but I'm getting there. Guys. It's hard enough with Dune Prophecy, by the way, but now, with Skeleton Crew and Creature Commandos, we'll see how well I do. But yeah, so then we get a scene, where Wim's dad is, he asks his dad to tell him a bedtime story, and his dad's like, no, I'm too busy for work. And it's sad, because you can tell his dad's trying his best, but I think that it's just not coming across the way that Wim needs it to. Also really funny, by the way, that they have iPads, like I mentioned, little tablets that are basically reading holographic comic books. I think that that's very interesting as well. So there is that. The one thing I was thinking about too as this episode was going on, because I remember I read through some of the first critic reactions, and most of them seemed to really like the first two episodes. I think they saw episodes 1 through 3, I believe. And there was one review that said something like, I thought the first episode was kind of slow and then it picks up later on. And I thought, I wondered about that as I was watching this episode. I wondered if I didn't know where this was eventually going, that this was going to be a space adventure with these kids in the vein of Stranger Things, Goonies or whatever. I wondered if I would have been also kind of bored by this. But honestly, I don't think so, because these kids, the charisma alone and just the way that they make you care about these characters, I think is more than enough, honestly, to kind of keep me invested. But, I did wonder about that, because right after the prologue with the mutiny, you just kind of spend some time with the kids. And eventually, right as I was writing this down in my notes, then we get into the scenes where they find the ship under the forest. So the show kind of picks up from there as well. And then, so then he finds, the mysterious thing in the forest. It's the classic trope of the kid getting caught up in the adventure story. The dad, he gets caught, first of all, and then he gets basically sent to the principal's office. And you have that very classic disappointed dad moment. Again, all these things could come off as very cheesy and very corny, but it somehow works well, where you're like, oh yeah, like disappointed dad trope, and then you kind of move on here. And, the other thing too, I guess what makes the suburbia or the, kind of school atmosphere feel okay in the Star Wars universe is that this show is really exemplifying what a different side of the Star Wars universe looks like. And I think that that's awesome, right? There, let's just say all these different shows that had come out conceptually, had reached their full potential. I think that there is more than enough room for all these shows conceptually. You have Mandalorian, a bounty hunting kind of show, and then turns into kind of a lost, or a found family kind of show with Grogu. You have Book of Boba Fett, which could have been a very cool crime drama or mafia drama, kind of in the vein of Penguin even. it could have been something like that. Ahsoka could have been kind of a continuation of the animation series. Acolyte could have been a really cool prequel murder mystery, and Andor is Andor, a very political thriller. And Obi-Wan could have been, a very somber drama. So I think that all these different shows have different places in the Star Wars universe, and regardless of execution, right? The concepts are there. And I think that this show is just showing another side of that as well. And I think that works very well. So then we get Fern and we get KB. We're introduced to them again more formally, and they, now we got a crew. We got a skeleton crew. And so as they're exploring the ship, I kind of thought this is where it seems like we're heading more towards the Stranger Things vibe. We're exploring the ship. It's kind of dark, scary things, but not really that scary things. Just sort of the ship coming to life. And of course, as one does when you're a kid, press the blinking button, because of course that's what you do. And it is a huge ship. My goodness, it is a huge ship. Also, poor Wim's dad. I mean, again, not the best dad in the world, but he seems like he's not a bad person at heart, and seeing his kid get thrown up into a spaceship, into outer space, past what they call the barrier, yikes. That is a big yikes. And then the episode ends, and they're going off into hyperspace, and at that point, I was so on board with this show. So we head into episode 2 now. In episode 2, every adventure in the Star Wars universe has to have an annoyed droid. It's just custom. And this droid is so funny because I love how they're able to take these droids and give them a little bit of a twist, right? And this droid, This droid is not like K2SO, even though this droid is kind of annoyed and ornery. No, this droid is a pirate droid. It's SM-33, and I can already tell I'm going to love this droid. I mean, even before the droid came and rescued the kids later, what a fantastic droid. Star Wars, say what you will, but almost every single property that they have, they never miss on the droids. The droids are just so much fun. Love the pirate droid. Now, they're lost, and they're just hanging out in space. I also, by the way, just going back to the droid, I wrote down this quote. He says, talking about Wim, he says, "Shall I throw him out of the airlock for insolence?" Just such a funny droid. I love when Star Wars gets the droids down really well. Also, there are actual skeletons on the ship. Fun. I suppose that's where the name Skeleton Crew will eventually come from. It seems pretty obvious that is what's going on. And so we're moving on here into the spaceport. By the way, I wrote down in my notes at this point, but I just had to reiterate, I was so on board with the show. I was loving the show. Just had to kind of reiterate this for myself because I was just so caught up in it. I was having such a great time there. So we head on to the spaceport, and there's a shady woman trying to get information out of Fern and KB, I guess trying to kidnap them. Really shady, kind of strange. And then, Neil's mouth, they had Neil and Wim head to a kind of bar, and Neil's mouth, of course, gets him in trouble, and we start to see all the pirates that we saw in the prologue. Also interesting what's established here, maybe hinting towards why these characters are more important, or where they're coming from is more important, why the ship was there, obviously, in the first place, is that Aten, I think is the name, is a lost treasure planet. So very interesting there. We'll see where that goes. And then SM-33 to the rescue, right? SM-33 is a menace, by the way. Just crazy what he was doing to all the pirates before they knock him out. And they fail, and they end up in prison, and it's time for Jude Law. And, I was wondering, because I think that they said in the press releases that he is a Jedi. Jude Law was a Jedi. But I was kind of like, is he a fake Jedi, or what's going on? Is he trying to scam people? But no, he is a real Jedi. It seems, at least. He's using the Force, which raises a lot of questions, I'm sure, as he's a Jedi in the post Return of the Jedi era. It seems like Yoda missed out on a bunch of Jedi who were just hanging around there. Ahsoka's hanging around there. I know she's not technically a Jedi, but anyways, kind of interesting. So I'm sure we'll see more of his backstory and where he comes into play. Maybe he will interact with Luke Skywalker. You never know. And he takes off his hood, and that's it. And like I said, I was just so surprised, and I looked at the little timeline, and I was like, oh, 25 minutes? Are you kidding me? It was basically 23 minutes because of the introduction. And that's the one frustrating thing with the first two episodes. Honestly, my biggest complaint is that episode 2 was so short. Episode 1 felt pretty full, honestly. I think it was about 35, 40 minutes long, and it felt pretty full for what it was. Because again, you don't have to make, I don't think all 30-minute episodes are created equal, and I don't think all hour-long episodes are created equal either. I think the Penguin, right? Hour-long episodes, amazing. I think there's a show on Apple TV Plus I keep talking about, Shrinking. 35-minute episodes, amazing. Sitcoms, 22-minute episodes. Some of them are so good. So not all 30-minute episodes are created equally. I think the first episode of Skeleton Crew, really good. But this 25-minute second episode, I was like, are you kidding me? Are we still doing this 25 minutes? Now, again, I still think what we got in this episode was great, but I didn't feel like we fully had gotten what we came for, in the first two episodes. And I don't think that's a discredit to the director. In fact, I think that is a credit to the showrunners and what they were able to do, because guys, it could all go downhill. It could all go downhill. I don't think I've disliked. I feel like the worst I could say about any premiere of a Disney Plus show is that I was neutral. I've liked almost all of them. I've loved quite a bit of them. But, it could all go downhill from here. But I would be lying if I didn't tell you I love this premiere. I love the first two episodes of Skeleton Crew, and I'm really excited for episode 3 and where it goes from here. So guys, let me know what you thought in the comments down below about episodes 1 and 2 of Skeleton Crew. Could this be the show that people get on board and rally behind, and it kind of unifies the fan base? Or is this going to be another clunker? We'll see. Let me know in the comments down below.